Got it. Hey, everyone. Lisa Drennon coming at you here with my friend Olivia. We are doing something new today, okay? Some of you know, I have a weekly series on YouTube called Forgiving the Girl Inside, A Healing Journey from To. And Olivia and I connected. She's one of my ambassadors for ULA 1B7. If you want to know more about that, just comment below 1B7 and either one of us will reach out to you. But I was like, she's got an incredible story. And I'm like, she's so brave. I'm like, hey, do you want to do this live? And then we'll throw it on YouTube tomorrow and you can share it across social media. And she agreed. I love this girl. It's amazing. So welcome to this week's episode of Forgiving the Girl Inside. I'm your host, Lisa Drennon, energetic mindset mentor, certified ULA life coach, certified aroma freedom practitioner, and self-published author of this book, Forgiving the Girl Inside, Finding Balance, Fun, Freedom, and Fun in Your Life. I know the title. I'm just so excited right now. You're not going to believe what my insides are doing. This is my story. And this is what started this YouTube series. And this is why I love hearing other women's stories, especially entrepreneurs. But enough about me. If you are new, if this is for the recording, for those of you watching Facebook Live right now, if you're new to the channel, hit subscribe. And if you're watching live, hit subscribe to my YouTube channel. Share this video with someone who you know needs to hear it. This is going to be an amazing story, totally off the cuff, with the brave Olivia Tansky, who is, and thank you, Olivia, once again for your service. I know we talked about that the other day, but please welcome her. She is a survivor, active duty military member, full-time student, and life coach. As a coach, she specializes in helping people identify their limiting beliefs, heal their relationships with themselves, and begin living lives branded by unapologetic freedom. Olivia has gone through a lot in her 20 years of life. Okay, this beautiful soul is only 20 years old. She is an old soul and is excited to be here with us to share her story of self-realization, struggle, and forgiveness. She is going to share her healing journey from false identity to authentic identity. So welcome, Olivia. Thank you so much for being here, for doing this live. You are amazing.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So excited to be connecting with everybody. And if my story can touch a single person and make them feel less alone in whatever it is they're going through, then I could die a very happy girl, because I remember what it felt like to be at that period in my journey when everything just felt so overwhelming and so terrifying that it took a couple key people in my life who I saw through the internet, like not even people who I knew personally, but people whose stories they were brave enough to broadcast, and I could resonate with those, and I felt less alone. So if I can do that for other people, that's all I could ask out of life, to be honest, because I think the very reason we're all here is to love one another and connect with one another and get through life as a collective. So I'm more than honored to be here, and I can't wait to get started.
Well, awesome. So tell us about yourself. Like, how did you get to, where were you before? I mean, you're only 20 years old. You've lived this amazing life. You're in the military. You made some major decisions. I understand you went on, how old were you when you first went out on your own?
So when I first went out on my own, it was the result of my coming out to my parents when I was 18. I was home for winter break my freshman year of college, and we had this conversation that really didn't go well, and I found myself completely on my own at 18. Had to figure out college, had to figure out what I was going to do with my life, had to figure out how to pay to exist, because I was completely and utterly cut off. So I found myself completely out on my own at 18 and a half, January of 2020, honestly. And that's when I made the decision to join the military, because I was formerly going to school in New York City at the King's College, at this really awesome liberal arts school where I was studying politics, philosophy, and economics, because I'm a total nerd, complete and utter nerd. Law school is my goal. So a little bit about me. I was raised by two very human people whom I love dearly, but I have some pretty significant differences with. I was raised in Mayaca City, Florida, which is a town literally out in the middle of nowhere, where their population of cows is higher than their population of people. Like, there are more cows per acre than there are people out there. So
Something was your favorite pastime?
yeah, I grew up riding horses. So like it was a good community for me to be in because that was my interest and that's what I love to do. But not very many people. I was homeschooled and I knew from a very young age that I was interested in law and a legal career because I love to debate, I love to argue, which is what took me to New York City, which is why I picked King's as my college for their politics, philosophy, and economics major. But life has been interesting, to say the least. I have gone through a sexual assault as a child. I have gone through periods of self-harm in high school, an eating disorder, hospitalization for panic attacks. The whole process of coming out was incredibly dramatic, being completely and utterly on my own for the last year and a half. Joining the military, which was crazy, going through boot camp, and most recently in April during a period of pretty intense training, I actually had a heart attack and I ended up in the hospital. And so I've been going through health stuff now. And every one of those events was obviously it affected me very heavily, but my story would not be what it is without every single one of those events, and I wouldn't change it, which is crazy because what I've learned, the lessons I've learned from each and every one of those things have been priceless. So that's a very broad synopsis, and I know we're going to get into more detail, but like that's all we've got to cover. So it hits a lot of different pain points for a lot of different people.
Yeah, and I can go in so many different directions with that. So what the false identity piece. So did you mold yourself into something that you thought everybody should, because of your experience of being molested as a child or because of demands put on you? Like what this false identity, why did you think that you had to be this one person and you couldn't be who you truly are?
So I grew up being handed a checklist that said, as long as you believe these things and you think these things and you vote for this political party, then you'll be loved. You'll be loved, you'll be supported. You won't want for anything in life. But I grew up and saw very early in life when my oldest brother, Justin, who is 12 years older than I am, he was the first of us kids to be like, I don't know about that checklist. I don't know if I can prescribe to that. I don't know if I can identify with it. And I saw how he was ostracized and the rest of us kids saw, because I have 3 older brothers and a younger sister, so there's 5 of us. He was the very first one to branch out on his own and be like, I don't think I can prescribe to this list of do's and don'ts. And then we immediately saw how he was treated for doing that. And it was not a pretty picture at all. He wasn't an active part of our family or an active part of our life. And like the way we heard our parents talk about him was not positive in any way, shape, or form. So it was very apparent right from the get-go when I was very young that you had to be a specific way to fit in. And all of that stemmed from the idea that like my parents saw us kids as an extension of themselves. So our behavior, our conduct, what we wanted to do with life reflected on them. And so when I, in the 6th grade, as young as I was, and as young as that sounds, in the 6th grade, when I said, I want to go to law school, I want to go to an Ivy League, like I want to go do all this crazy stuff in life, that was the first bit of friction I ran into because that's not what my parents wanted. They wanted me to meet some guy, get married, have kids, settle down, live on the farm adjacent to theirs. Like that was their dream. And as their first daughter, I understand that. Like I understood where they were coming from and I don't blame them for that anymore. But it's not the path in life that I grew up to realize that I was going to head down. So I think as parents, I'm not a parent myself. But if I were to try and put myself in their shoes, you have kids and you have a specific idea of what their lives, what their futures are going to look like, right? Like you have a specific, just general conception of what's going to happen. And in my parents' case, they were really wrong. I really surprised them on pretty much every front. So I grew up believing, though, that if I didn't fit the specific list, if I wasn't these specific things, if I wasn't straight, if I wasn't super conservative, if I wasn't prescribing to every single thing they claimed to be absolute truth, that then I was excluded from that love bubble. which for anybody who knows what it feels like to be looking at a set of expectations and then know that they're different from those expectations, that contrast is terrifying. It's isolating. It's painful. And it feels impossible to reconcile the two. So then on top of this list of expectations, I was also raised to believe that my parents' version of the gospel and of Jesus, it was inherently legalistic. It was very much, you do all these things, God's happy with you for doing these things, and then you're good. It was not a matter of grace. There was no grace involved. There was no unconditional love from God expressed. There was no faith involved in the equation. It was, you do this, God does this. You guys are either on good or bad terms, which is very legalistic, very cut dry, and leaves very little room for the human experience. So growing up, those were the circumstances under which I operated. Just do this, be this, then you'll be okay. So when high school rolled around, and specifically when I recognized that I was different because I wasn't attracted to boys, I was attracted to my girlfriends, and I recognized I was different, I was terrified that I could not look at that checklist and say, okay, I can check off all these things and everything's going to be good and everything's going to be fine. And that put me in a very, very, very dark place. Because when you realize that at the end of the day, you can't meet the expectations that have been put in front of you, there's a specific amount of shame that is immediately associated with that realization. And that it put me in a very, very dark position. And it wasn't until my senior year of high school when I recognized that if I was so miserable in life that I didn't want to live anymore, I maybe need to take a second to look at my life and ask myself whether this is how I want to be living. Mm-hmm. And that's what really started my journey.
So what was the day like when you obviously told your parents and they seemingly cut you off financially, 18 years old, and said, well, fine, go do it on your own if that's what you want? What made you brave enough to do that, to have that conversation?
That I still, to this day, a year and a half later, am not 110% sure what gave me the confidence or the courage to do that. It was a very, very long and completely terrifying process. Because, I mean, I've known that I was gay probably since I was like 6. My first crush was on like the oldest daughter in The Sound of Music, and I was obsessed with that actress. I loved her. And then as I got older and I experienced different things, I was in denial for a very long time because I didn't want to be different. I didn't want to be abnormal. I didn't want to feel like I wasn't worthy of love for whatever reason. So it really took me leaving my hometown and moving and going to college and being surrounded by a group of people with whom I experimented for the first time with just being like honest and vulnerable and authentic, which were words never used in my house because my parents' conception of a happy life was like the dollhouse imagery, that as long as everything looks good from the outside, as long as we can say that our kids do this, this, and that, and our relationship looks like this, this, and that, as long as that looks like that from the outside, it doesn't matter what's going on internally. So when I found a community and a group of people that cared more about my authenticity and my feelings and who I really was versus the image I was putting out to the world, that very drastically shifted my perception on life. And then honestly on God. Because God went from this concept of this ever judgmental being who only cared if I read my Bible for 30 minutes every morning and prayed for X amount of people to this concept of a divine being who loved me so much that he would come down, die on the cross, send his son to do all of that for me, specifically just because he loves me. And that blew my brain wide open. So the biggest catalyst was going to school, realizing that I could exist and function on my own, and that there were people who existed outside of my itty bitty community in Florida that were going to love me no matter what. And I'll never forget, because my parents came to visit one weekend in October, and up in New York, the leaves were all changing, and it was powder puff football that weekend. My school was hosting this event where all the girls came out and we all played flag football, and it was so much fun because I'm super athletic, and volleyball season was just ending because I played collegiate volleyball. And my parents came up for parents weekend, and I'll never forget being at powder puff, like doing the whole experience. And I was walking home with my friend Renee because another one of the girls on her team got a concussion, and my parents went to the hospital with her because her parents were in town. It was this whole thing. And my friend Renee asked, like, she knew the whole situation with my parents. Like, she knew that I hadn't told them that I was terrified. Like, I wasn't sleeping. I was having panic attacks. The eating disorder was at full height just because I was so stressed. Like, the idea of synthesizing who I knew I had come to be with the person that I had let them believe I was for so long, like, that girl's death was going to be really traumatic for everybody. So I remember walking back to the apartment building from like Prospect Park. It was a solid 25 minute walk. And Renee looked at me and was like, so how's everything going with your parents? And I was like, well, it's been great. Like, I wish I could be honest with them. Like, I wish I could tell them how I'm feeling and what I'm going through without the fear of their reaction. And she was like, well, do you understand though that like 50% of that anxiety comes from the fact that like you're not comfortable with you yet? And I was like, wow, call me out there, Renee. Okay. And we went on to talk, and like there was a sermon that she recommended I listen to by Tim Keller, who I love his work. If anybody's listening, the Prodigal Son sermon by him is incredible. He takes the gospel and he interprets that story in such a way that like you're not looking at the world in the sense of like sinners and non-sinners anymore, because that second category doesn't exist, but you're looking at it from people who are humble and proud, the people who are just completely overwhelmed by the love of God and by the love of Jesus, and then want to go love people through that, versus the people who are still so self-religious and still relying on themselves like for their own salvation. And that completely changed my entire perspective. But I remember having that conversation with her and still being pretty largely confused, because I was like, how does this relate to me? And then after Powder Puff, after like I had dinner with my parents, I remember sitting in bed and thinking, for the first time, realizing that in the eyes of God, it didn't matter. I wouldn't be any more broken or any more worthy of love if I were straight. And that broke the door off of things for me. And after I grasped that concept and realized to myself that it didn't matter at the end of the day to God or anyone else who I loved, that then gave me the courage to show up and own my story, in the words of Brene Brown, which, for anybody watching, if you don't know who Brene Brown is, you need to Google her right now, because I swear that woman changed my life. With her, she has a 20-minute TED Talk on YouTube about vulnerability that will completely change everything you've ever thought about how you feel. But she also has an 1.5-hour long special on Netflix where she systematically works through each and every myth that people associate with vulnerability. And it's so powerful, because I grew up thinking that vulnerability was weakness, expressing your feelings was weakness, that if you expressed how you felt, you rocked the boat and it caused more problems. So it was better to minimize yourself and make yourself small and put yourself in this little emotional cage and just not let yourself out, because then you could make everyone around you happy, when none of that's true.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. But it happens to so many people. So many people are emotionally trapped. And, we talked about this before. It's just like that unforgiveness, that shame, that fear, and the things that people say to us, that especially at a young age. My son and I were talking earlier about, if I could just stop. And some of the things that little kids are being told by their parents, it's so heartbreaking. Like you go to the store and you'll hear these little kids getting yelled and screamed at, called stupid and this and that. It's like, stop. These are hurting their ears.
Right.
Yeah, words matter so much. They're so important.
Yeah, kids are like sponges. They absorb things that are said to them, and they don't even process it on like a conscious level. Like there's no part of them that when things are said to them that stops and like thinks about it. They just absorb it, and then it affects how they express themselves. It affects how they think about the world and how they view everything, and and it's such a subconscious process that as children, we don't even realize what it is we're consuming, internalizing, and then expressing. So while I no longer blame my parents for the upbringing I had, because it made me who I am today, I know that with my own kids, I want to be incredibly conscious about creating a home that feels so safe that whatever it is that they're going through, I want them to feel comfortable bringing to me. Absolutely. Because I know what it feels like to be going through life and be going through struggles and being scared out of your mind and just not having anyone to talk to about it. And it's isolating, terrifying, and bitterness and anger grow in isolation without a doubt. Because I remember so distinctly the summer after my senior year of high school, but before I went to college, my primary coping mechanism was just working my body to the point that I couldn't function anymore. So when it comes to dealing with stress and dealing with emotional trauma and dealing with whatever it is happening in your life, it could be a divorce, it could be coming out, it could be reconciling yourself, it could be realizing that you're not happy in the circumstances that you're in and you need to make big changes, whatever it is that's happening in your life. There's specific ways that we as people cope with that stress, cope with that experience. And I didn't have healthy coping mechanisms. My go-tos were my eating disorder and working my ass off in the gym every day, because the only time I could feel peace was after I had spent myself and then I had nothing more to give. And I just was there on the floor panting, knowing I had just given everything I had to whatever workout I was doing. And that only bred anger and resentment. There was no part of healing yet in that process. So I would definitely encourage anybody who's going through something so strenuous in their life that they're not sure how to cope with it, they're not sure what to feel. While it's hard to direct people like, hey, try this, like try journaling, try meditating, try reaching out to your support system, whatever it is, whatever you do, don't exhaust yourself. Like, don't punish your body because you feel like you can't punish your mind, because that's where I was. And it just made things worse. Coping mechanisms are so important.
Yeah, they are. Definitely. We have to call it out and work through it. And that's the whole healing process. And so many people are stuck in that process because they're so afraid to write it out, and call it out. I mean, I was stuck in fear from the 2 abortions that I had, being pregnant 3 times before I was 17, had no idea how that had defined my mind and how much anger and fear and shame and guilt I had felt. But I just kept spending over 3 decades trying to people please and do all this stuff to make myself feel better. Let me serve people, let me wait on you because then you'll like me, because I hated myself, who I was inside. And I know once I spoke that the first time and I shared that, it was just like kind of breath, like a boulder coming off the shoulder. So it's so important. So once you came out to your parents and you shared, and then you were basically cut off, you made the decision to go into the military and to start this life. And what was the one thing that we talked about the emotional healing. So that's the physical things that you did, but what was the one thing that started your emotional healing journey?
The one thing that really jump-started my emotional healing was, and it has been such a recent experience that I've become good at this, but the realization that at the end of the day, because I'm also a people pleaser, 110%. I was raised that you don't rock the boat. You don't make yourself, like, you don't take up too much space. Don't be too loud, because then you aggravate the people around you and you'll cause problems. So I came out to my mom and my dad separately. I came out to my mom 2 weeks before Christmas. When she came up to New York with my 2 sister-in-laws and my biological sister to see the city and see everything like in the New York Christmas time. And I wrote her this like super long 3,000 word letter that was just like my heart. It was everything. It was my experience. It was all of it. Because I knew I had a way better relationship with my mom than I did my dad. My dad had always been verbally, physically abusive. He'd always been just a really tough cookie, to put it lightly. So and that experience was a lot more positive than I anticipated, at least originally. But then, of course, like, while my story is my story, of course it affects her. And there was her own process she had to go through to work through all that. But long story short, my brother was getting married January 1st. Her and I agreed to not tell my dad until after the wedding because we didn't want like some big family blow up right before the happiest day of my brother's life. So I told my dad January 2nd, and it was horrific. He immediately lost his mind. He broke picture frames. He knocked down bookshelves. Like he went physical. He threatened to like leave my mom, sell the whole property, kick my brother and my sister-in-law out. Like he went on a rampage. So it wasn't just me at this point whose life was affected. It was everyone, because his toxic relationship with himself is so deep that it's just who he is at this point. So after that whole experience, my best friend bought me a plane ticket to Atlanta, Georgia. I got on a plane. I got there and I started the healing process was the only word I really have for it is fragile. It was a very, very fragile process. And that day, January 2nd, was not the end of the line for me. After that, had a massive falling out with one of my best friends over another situation that we were all involved in. My parents actually they started a 40-day Pray the Gay Away challenge. I have videos and photos on my phone of they have written scripture and prayers over my entire room, like my old room back at their house. All the walls are covered in Sharpie with various Bible verses, prayers from people who I haven't even met personally, craziness. And it got to a point where they cut me off, but then they were like, we want to take you to conversion therapy. We want to fix you. You're sick, you're broken, you're whatever. We want to help you. And I was like, no, actually I'm fine. I'm going to figure this out. Don't contact me again because this isn't healthy. So that's when in mid-February, I made the decision to join the military. And that came from a place of, at that point, I just needed security. I needed independence, and I needed to be able to say yes, I can take care of myself. So, which is what drove my decision to join the military. But when it came to emotional healing, the biggest realization I had to make was that my story, my life, who I am just inherently was someone who's worth showing up for. Mm-hmm. Because here I am, I'm on this earth for some purpose. I am experiencing things for some purpose. And at the time, I didn't understand what that purpose was. It didn't make any sense to me. It just all felt uncomfy and hard and difficult. But I made the realization that I'm here. So for whatever reason I'm here, I need to own whatever's going on. And that's what really gave me the courage, especially to come out to my dad and just say, this is me. This is who I am. Take it or leave it. But it's just what it is. And then over the next year and a half, that lesson is one I would have to go through again and again and again and again and again, because living authentically and choosing to show up every day and own your story is not a one-time decision. It's not something you say okay, I'm going to do this today. And then it happens. That's not how it works. I was talking in my Facebook group actually yesterday about when you have a toxic relationship with yourself, that's not something that it doesn't just go away. You don't recognize it. And then all of a sudden it just disappears and you're good to go and you're all confident and you're ready to take on the world. No, it's a very long process and it's a day by day thing. And it manifests itself in very unique ways. So after everything happened with my parents, I left New York and I moved to South Carolina because I had joined the military, I'd enlisted, but I didn't know when I was leaving at that point. So I was going to live with my best friend, Rebecca, who has been my friend for 10 plus years. Shout out to Rebecca Drumgold, who is the greatest soul in the entire world. Her and I will be friends for forever. Hi, Rebecca. She's going to end up watching this on my page. But so I was going
shout out to Rebecca.
Yeah, she's a phenomenal human being with the biggest heart. Her and her family are so special to me. I've known them since I was 9. Here we are 11 years later, and they're amazing. But so I was going to live with her. And then long story short, I met this girl, got into this relationship, and ended up staying with her until I left for boot camp, like 3 months later. And it was interesting to see how over the next year and a half, through the course of that relationship, me being gone and boot camp and in tech school and everything, I did not value myself enough to leave a relationship that wasn't healthy for either of us until 2 months ago, when I think that's the first time not the first time, but one of the most significant times I can look back and say, I made a decision for myself because I'm worth it, even though it hurt somebody I really love. And I regret that. I regret that it hurt her, but I don't regret making the choice, because at the end of the day, it's you and you. And if your relationship with yourself isn't where it needs to be, none of your relationships will be healthy.
Amen to that.
And that's a very hard lesson to learn. And that goes back to my parents, that goes back to my childhood. It all comes back to showing up for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very hard thing to do.
Well, I'm glad you found this journey, this roadmap. It is a daily healing journey.
Absolutely.
I'm going to embarrassingly admit that it took me years, over 3-4 decades, and I still tell myself, there's things that I still argue with myself about, and I have to completely turn to the Lord and just say, okay, you know what? I need to get out of my own way. Mm-hmm. My husband used to tell my kids as they were like growing up, like the sweetheart, boyfriend, girlfriend relationships, whatever, even like best friend relationships, like, you get into that fight and you get all upset, as parents, you deal with your teens going through that. And, we would see, like, some of my kids would tell me, well, so-and-so, they did this, and then they went and they have this best friend, or they have this boyfriend, or whatever it was, already. And my husband always telling me, like, you know what, when you're in a relationship, you have to be happy with yourself in order to give to that relationship. So amen. You can go relationship hopping if you want, mm-hmm. But remember, if you're not happy with yourself, it doesn't matter who you're with, you're going to be unhappy. Eventually the grass doesn't get greener. And I always remember that, especially, when they, because it is hard to, and you're in ULA, we're ambassadors. One of the things we learn is to cut out those toxic relationships. And if you don't have, if you can't look at the Fab Five, if you got friends or family members that are, toxic, and they're giving you crap and they're not supporting you, you got to be your own person. You got to make your own decisions, and they might not agree with we're not ever going to agree with what everybody does. I mean, people don't agree with what I do. I'm not living my life for them. It's between me and God, and He knows our hearts, and He knows where we're at. And I loved how you explained the beauty of His love. It is unconditional, and there are no strings attached. And we all mess up. And we are here for a purpose to share, and it's okay. And I just love that. I love that I'm glad amen. You found your authentic self, and that you're living that, and you took great risk. Your bravery is beyond, and I would imagine you'll be getting more podcast interviews, video interviews from this, because just to be so young to realize what you needed to do and to go out and do that, like, wow, that's you got some great values instilled in you, and your thought process is so beautiful. And that health condition, that's scary. So I hope they get to the bottom of that and
me too.
Figure that out. So how can people connect with you?
So to connect with me, I am most active on my personal Facebook and my Instagram, which is my Instagram is just Olivia_Tansky, Tanski. Same with my Facebook. But I'm most excited about a week ago, I kicked off my very first Facebook group, which is titled Unapologetic Freedom. So you can find it under that name, or if you're on my personal Instagram, there's the link to the group. And it's a group that I created because I wanted a platform where people who are ready to own their shit, recognize that they're either toxic for themselves, toxic for other people, whatever it is that is your limiting belief, whatever is keeping you from effectively living the life you want. Like, let's talk about that, because there's so much shame associated with it. Like, I know I'm a perfectionist. I'm a recovering perfectionist, in the words of Brene Brown. I wanted my life to look a specific way because I was raised on that dollhouse mentality that it's like, it all has to be pretty from the outside. It doesn't really happen. It doesn't matter what's going on the inside. It does matter what's going on the inside. Spoiler alert. But so I created this group because wholehearted living is hard and you can't do it alone. You need a community. You need people who are coming alongside you and saying, let's do this together. It's hard and it's scary and we have no clue what we're doing, but we can do hard things. So I'm very excited about my Facebook group, but I also offer one-on-one individualized coaching. My website is in the works right now. I'm very excited about it. But in order to find out details about that and my programs and everything, just a simple DM, I would love to get on a call with anyone who's interested, or we can email or chat, like whatever is most convenient for them, because my website's not up and running entirely yet. We're still in the works on that one. But I'm also in the process of writing a book about my entire story, my process, everything from the sexual trauma I experienced as a 7-year-old to like through the whole thing, through all the self-harm in high school and the hospitalizations and the panic attacks and the PTSD and the not sleeping and the nightmares and the coming out and all of it. I'm trying to condense into a story that people can pick up and can relate to. So the estimated release date for that is fall of this year. It's a work in progress. And I'm so excited for that project. I can hardly see straight. And it's because it's hard and it's challenging. It's very difficult. I wrote a good bit yesterday about the chunk of time in 2019 where my life really, it felt like it was falling apart. Like it felt like everything was burning around me. I didn't understand what was going on. I was super confused. I was super alone. And it's very challenging to step back into those emotions and into that time period and to relive it almost, to write it so that the reader can really engage with it. But I'm very excited for that project. So hopefully we're thinking October, beginning of November of this year, when that should be available for people to read and engage with. So I will keep everybody up to date on that.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. What's the title of the book?
I'm between 2 titles right now, so I can't quite give it away. But
stay tuned. Follow her. You'll be able to know.
Stay tuned for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And when this gets posted on YouTube, the links to connect with you will be on there as well. So thank you so much. Your story is beautiful. I am so honored to hear it and for you to share it live on Facebook. And again, it'll be on YouTube. It'll be across social media, LinkedIn, Pinterest. And again, if you know somebody who needs it, who needs to hear this, please share this video with them now. Tag them in it. Connect with Olivia and she will answer any questions you have. So thank you again.
Absolutely. My teams are always open.
Have an amazing night. I'm gonna stop that and stop recording.
Don't you love it when you're like, is it stop?